work. Wanted to go over how to get your MIDI drums sounding more realistic. I had a student ask me about this the other day. He's using MIDI drums. How can we get them to sound more realistic? They sound fake. And the answer really is, MIDI drums are never going to sound as good as a real acoustic drum kit, in my opinion. But there are things we can do to get them sounding a bit more like an actual acoustic kit. So I figured I'd put this out there, see if it helps anybody else out. A lot of people are stuck using software drums or MIDI drums because they aren't a drummer, or sometimes they don't have a place to record drums. But when I get sent a project with MIDI drums in it, I choose to do a couple things. So I'm going to show you what those things are. So I have a project here, not really a project. I just made this for this video. So I just recorded some guitar tracks, a bass track, and have a MIDI drum loop in here. Just because I wanted some music behind the drums so you can hear what it sounded like in an actual song. The music's not very good, and I didn't spend a lot of time on the drums, but I did do some of the things that I would normally do when I'm trying to make a MIDI kit sound a bit more realistic. So what we got down here is this is the MIDI drum loop that I have that I just put in there. It's just using the Logic drummer, but it's muted because I'm not using it anymore. So what I did is I just bounced all of the individual tracks in the drummer to its own track. So I went to the overheads, bounced that, bounced the kicks, snare, and so on. And that's what all these red regions are. They're all the individual drum tracks. And then what I do is I set things up how I normally would work. So I have all my kicks at the top here going to the kick bus, snares are all going to the snare bus, and so on. And everything ends up at this drum bus down here. So first of all, I'm just going to play you what the loop that I started with sounds like with the music. And then I'll stop it and switch to my drums that I processed. So here are the MIDI drums. And now the process. So now I'll just do that with the music muted so you can hear just the drums. So here are the original drums. And now the process. So these drums sound super crazy on their own, but with the music, they really do sound better because they got so much more of that room vibe. So I will show you exactly what I did to get here. So there's really three things we need to do here. We need to saturate everything. We need to make the cymbals darker because those really high crisp cymbals sound really fake in the drum loop. And then we need to add a ton of room sound. So I have everything bypassed here. So I'm just going to start from the beginning and show you exactly what I did. So I'm really only using a couple plugins here I'm just using them on almost every track. So let's go to the kick in and listen to it. Okay, it sounds like a normal kick. So what I threw on here is Decapitator, and this is just some saturation, some drive. So let's put this on, see what it does. So that's really oversaturating the kick, but it's a good thing in this case. So what I usually do is just pull this up, dial up the drive, and then dial back the mix knob so we're not killing it. So here's what it would sound like completely wet. So I just dial it back a little bit. So that's all we did there. And then I just copied the setting over to our kick out. So let's hear what that sounds like. And then, like I normally do with my drums, I added a kick sample, and this is a pretty dull sample. Here's what it sounded like. And again, I just copied that decapitator over and we gave it some drive. And then we ended up with the kick sound that we have, which is this. It sounds a little bit too overdriven on its own, but in the mix with the drums, this actually sounds pretty good. So the point here is really to oversaturate these samples to get them sounding more realistic. Now, I did basically the same thing with the snare drums. So I just slapped Decapitator on both the snare top, bottom, and added my sample and distorted that as well. This is what we started off with. So this is the snare samples from the loop. And then we ended up with this. So not a huge difference, but then I chose to go above and beyond. So I sent all of these snares, all three of them, to this bus 7, which is my snare crush bus. So what I did here is I threw the Devil Lock on this bus, which is another Sound Toys plugin, and I chose the Drum Giant Sizer preset, messed with the knobs a little bit, darkened this up, and I'll show you before and after. So we're really distorting and crushing this snare with this. So let's take a listen to the snare without this in there, and then we'll throw it back in. And that gives it a huge mid-range bump and just saturates the snare drum very nicely. So now we're getting closer to a more realistic sounding drum set with all this saturation. And I just did the same thing on the toms with the decapitator, so I'm not going to go over that. And then I threw the decapitator on the overheads as well. But what I also did with the decapitator is roll off the high ends. So I don't want as much of the bright cymbals in this because those sound very fake in samples. So we rolled a little bit of that off. And next we go to our room mic. So this is very important. So this is what the room sounded like. They don't sound bad, and this is what's gonna really help us get this kit sounding more realistic. So I did add a tiny bit more reverb on here. It's not much, I just felt like it was a little too dry, so it's down at like 10% reverb there. And then we use our CLA 76 and we are just crushing this to get some pumping, some of that pumping effect from the rooms. So with that compressor, we're really able to get just some more energy out of the drums because MIDI drums aren't very energetic. So if we can get some of that pumping on the rooms with a compressor, that will definitely help. So next, I just had this Leak microphone. The Logic drummer has a Leak microphone. I just chose to leave it in there. I didn't do anything to it. So this is what the kit sounds like so far. So it definitely sounds a lot better than what we started with. But I did do some additional things on the drum bus to try to push it forward a tiny bit more. Next, I always like to add a limiter when I'm working with MIDI drums just to shave off some of the peaks of the sample so they're not sticking out. So here we're just getting a little bit of gain reduction on the loudest hits. So I did feel like with the music, the kit was sounding a bit thin, so I boosted at 100 with one of these pole techs. So here's before and after. And then I just kind of went crazy with some saturation. So I added virtual mix rack, threw on the virtual mix bus for some coloration. I then added the virtual tape machine as I usually do to the drum bus, nothing special. And then last but not least, I threw the Devil Lock on there again and I just dialed it in a tiny bit, and I used the darkness a little bit as well to kinda make it so those symbols weren't as bright. So here's before and after. And that really brings the room sound forward as well. So again, I'll just show you the loop and the drums we ended up with. So, would I be able to tell that those were fake if I were listening to it and, and didn't know? Probably, I probably would, but the average listener probably wouldn't. And if there was a vocal line over it, they'd probably be thinking about it even less. So, it is possible to get decent sounding MIDI drums. It just takes a little bit of work. And these drums could probably sound a bit better if we took the time to do some EQ and that sort of thing, like we normally would do on acoustic drums. But that's all I got for today. So I hope you learned something. As always, reach out if you have any questions. Have a good one. Guys, thanks for watching. Make sure to download your free Ultimate Home Studio Mix Guide. I made this for you guys so you could start getting your mixes sounding better. There's a lot of great information in there. And be sure to reach out if you have any questions or if you need any help with your mixes. Thanks.